My name is Chloe, and at 36, I learned that my place in this family came with conditions I was never told about at my parents' 30th anniversary party, a party I had single handedly planned, booked, and bled over for 5 months. My father stopped me at the entrance of the main hall, glanced at the slim silver wrapped package under my arm, and pointed toward the side door that opened into the garage. "Honey, that area is for the extended family," he said. There was a half smile on his face when he said it. The kind of smile a man wears when he believes he is being perfectly reasonable. Every aunt and uncle had a seat at the main table. Every cousin had a name card on a white china plate. Every in-law who had shown up twice in the last decade had a chair with a gold ribbon tied to the back, including my cousin Victor, the one who had quietly taken $500 from my grandmother's savings account 2 years ago and called it a loan he intended to repay. He was seated 3 chairs from my mother, laughing at something on his phone, was the only blood standing in a doorway. That smelled like motor oil and old paint, but here is what none of them knew. The slim package I was holding under my arm, the one wrapped in silver paper, the one I had spent 11 weeks putting together, was worth more than everything on that table combined. Not in dollars. In the kind of currency that cannot be replaced once it leaves the room. What I did with it that evening emptied their house in 3 weeks. Not dramatically, not loudly, just steadily, the way water empties, a vessel with a crack at the bottom. Welcome back to Silent Boundary, where quiet people finally set the table on their own terms, and the people who took them for granted discover too late what that table was worth. If a story like this has ever been yours, you already know what it feels like to stand in a doorway holding something priceless and being told, "The garage is good enough." Drop a comment below, and make sure you subscribe, because this story is just getting started. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what I did. I'm a CPA, forensic specialization, the kind of work where someone hands you 19 months of company ledgers and a suspicion, and you sit in a conference room under fluorescent lights until you find the transaction on page 12 that changes everything. Built that career on my own. Night classes at a community college, because the 4-year programs didn't offer evening slots. 2 part-time jobs simultaneously, one at an office supply store, one entering data for a small import firm for nearly 4 years. I used the public library the way other people use a university. My library card was worn smooth by the time I graduated. Nobody co-signed anything for me. Nobody called at 11 p.m. to check if I had eaten. Nobody sent money just in case. I did not come from poverty. I came from a family that had enough that nobody worried, and just little enough that nobody noticed me quietly making do. And in the Harrison family, that was my assigned role almost from the beginning. The one who matado, and who made sure. If a utility bill was overdue, I caught it before it became a disconnection notice. If a holiday needed coordinating across 4 sets of relatives with conflicting schedules, I built the plan in a notebook and made the calls. If Grandma, my father's mother, needed her blood pressure medication refilled, or her water heater checked before winter, I drove the 30 miles to her place and handled it, not because anyone asked. Asking would imply they had thought about it and decided to delegate. They simply never thought about it at all. I was the thinking that happened on their behalf, invisibly without invoice. When I was 23, my mother sat across from me at the kitchen table, looking at a pile of unopened envelopes, quarterly taxes, I think, or maybe the car insurance, and said to Chloe, "You're good at managing these things." That sentence was my job offer. No title, no salary, no review schedule. Just a permanent position at the operations desk of a family that only called when something needed fixing. My therapist? I started seeing her 3 years ago, after a particularly long stretch where I realized I hadn't taken a day off in 14 months. Once told me that chronic over-responsibility is a trauma response wearing the costume of competence. She said it gently, the way you say something to someone you're not sure is ready to hear it. I sat with it for a week before I understood what she meant. Before that, I had simply called it being useful. So when my parents announced they wanted to celebrate their 30th anniversary with a large gathering, family, neighbors, old colleagues, there was never a question of who would make it happen. It was simply assumed. The way the sun is assumed to rise. Nobody decides it. It just does. My mother called me in February, 6 months before the August date, with her vision already fully formed. "Something elegant," she said. "Not too showy, but the kind of thing people remember. Gold chairs, good food, proper lighting for the photographs. Make sure the caterer does the food the right way. Your father's side will complain if anything is off. And I want fresh flowers, not those artificial things your Aunt Martha uses. Oh, and the photographer needs to get the house, the front porch especially. She did not say please. She did not say thank you. She said make sure, and in our house, make sure had always been a sentence with my name already written inside it. I opened a new folder on my laptop that evening and began. Over the next 8 weeks, I contacted 11 venues, shortlisted 3, visited 2, and booked 1, an event property outside the city with a courtyard that held 80 people and came with its own lighting rig. I called 6 caterers, tasted 4 menus, and negotiated a package that saved my parents $1,800 off the first quote. I arranged Grandma's transport. She uses a walker now, and the venue had uneven ground near the entrance. So I spoke to the owner directly and got a flat stone path laid along the accessible route. I handled the invitation design, the printing, the guest list cross-references, the parking coordination with the neighboring lot owner, and a seating chart built in Excel with color-coded columns for dietary restrictions, family branches, and the 2 sets of people who were not on speaking terms and needed to be placed on opposite ends of the courtyard. I spent 14 evenings on logistics alone, but the thing I was most quietly proud of, the thing I had been working on separately, in stolen hours, for almost 2 years, was the gift. My parents had one, photograph from their wedding day. A single Polaroid, bleached yellow at the edges, cracked diagonally across the center, taped to the inside of a kitchen cabinet with 2 strips of yellowing tape. I had looked at it 100 times growing up, without fully registering what it meant. Then one evening, 2 years ago, I was standing at that cabinet looking for something. Olive oil, auspices, I don't remember, and the photograph caught my eye and I thought, this is the only record they have. One cracked Polaroid in a kitchen cabinet. I took it down carefully. I had it scanned at a studio in the city that specialized in old photograph restoration. Then I sent the scan to a digital restoration artist who spent 3 weeks, 3 actual weeks, rebuilding the image pixel by pixel. The crack, the bleaching, the color fade, all repaired. The final image was printed on archival cotton rag paper, framed in a handmade walnut frame with UV-WAR protective glass, and mounted with a small engraved brass plate at the bottom that read 30 years and counting. It had cost me $225 and 11 weeks of patient correspondence. I wrapped it in silver paper myself, the evening before the party, sitting on my apartment floor with the kind of care you give something you know is irreplaceable. I arrived at the venue at 4:30 in the afternoon, 2.5 hours before guests were expected. I'd coordinated with the venue staff the previous evening, confirmed the caterer's arrival time that morning, and texted the photographer a shot list 3 days earlier. There was nothing left to do except show up and make sure the last hour ran smoothly. The courtyard looked the way I had imagined it would. Gold chairs, real linens in a deep ivory, fresh floral arrangements that the florist had delivered exactly on schedule. The lighting came on at dusk, warm and even, the way I had asked for. Grandma was already seated near the center table in the accessible spot. I had reserved, her transport had arrived, without incident. The flat stone path had worked perfectly, and she looked genuinely comfortable for the first time at a family event. In years, my mother walked through the courtyard at 5:00 and said, "The flowers are nice." That was hair of you. Guests began arriving at 7. I stood near the entrance for the first hour, directing people to their seats, handing the photographer the revised shot list I had printed, checking that the caterer's team had the serving sequence right. I was still holding my gift. I had kept it with me the whole time, not wanting to leave it unattended with the other envelopes and bags. Near the gift table, at 7:45, my father found me near the entrance. He looked comfortable. New dress shirt, collar pressed. He was in the mood that comes over him at gatherings where things are going well. A kind of expansive ease, as though the smooth running of the evening were a natural feature of the world, like pleasant weather, rather than the result of 5 months of unpaid labor by his daughter. He glanced at the silver package under my arm. Then he glanced toward the side door. "Chloe," he said, "the space in there is for the extended family. You should go sit in there. It's comfortable. They've set up chairs." I looked past him to the main courtyard. The gold chairs, the ivory linens, the fresh floral arrangements I had personally selected at 7 a.m. on a Sunday 2 weeks ago. Standing at the flower market in the early cold with my phone notes open, cousin Victor, the one with Grandma's 500 in his pocket, who had not attended a single family event in 4 years and had arrived tonight because there would be good food and an audience, was seated at the center table, 3 chairs from my mother. My father had a small, settled smile on his face. Reasonable, unbothered. The smile of a man who does not perceive what he is doing because he has never had to. Looked at him for a moment. Then I looked at the silver package in my hands. Then I said 2 words. "Okay, Dad." And I walked not toward the side door, toward the main entrance. I handed the silver package to Grandma on my way past, bent close to her ear and said, "This is from me to them. Open it later, Grandma. Make sure they see it." She looked at me with eyes that had seen 78 years of this family's interior weather, and she gave a single small nod. Then I walked out of the courtyard, through the parking area, and to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for about 4 minutes without starting the engine. I was not crying. I was not angry in the way that shakes your hands. I was something quieter and more final, the feeling of a decision, arriving not as an impulse but as a conclusion. You have been slowly reaching for years. Started the car and drove home. My phone started ringing at 9:17 p.m. My mother, first. Then my father. Then my Aunt Carol, my father's sister-in-law, who I suspected had been volunteered to call because she was considered the family diplomat. I let them all go to voicemail. At 9:45 p.m., a message came through from Grandma's phone, typed slowly, with the deliberate spacing of someone not accustomed to touchscreen keyboards. "Honey, saw the gift. Very beautiful. They are asking where you went? I told them you went home." At 11:30 p.m., my mother left a voicemail that began with, "Chloe, you embarrassed us in front of everyone," and ended with, "We will talk tomorrow." I did not call back that night. The next morning, I sent a single message to my parents. "See to no one. I'm taking some time. I'll be in touch when I'm ready." And then I stopped. I stopped coordinating. I stopped tracking. I stopped being the person who remembered that the property tax on the family house was due in October, that my father's car insurance renewed in November, that my mother's dental appointment needed to be rescheduled after she canceled it in June. I stopped being the person who called the plumber, followed up with the accountant, noticed that the propane was running low, had been doing these things, this exact constellation of invisible tasks for 13 years. They had never been requested. They had never been thanked. They had simply been done. The way oxygen is done, and like oxygen, they were entirely invisible until they stopped. 3 days after the party, my mother called because she could not find the venue owner's number to retrieve a shawl she had left behind. I was the one who had that number. I said gently, "Mom, I don't have it saved anymore. You could try calling the venue directly." I did have it saved. But I had made a decision. 1 week after the party, my father called because the car insurance reminder had come and he wasn't sure if it was the right amount. He usually just gave me the documents and I handled it. I said, "Dad, the policy number is on the document itself. The insurer's number is on their website." He sounded confused. Not angry, genuinely confused. As if something that should have been automatic had suddenly required effort. That confusion was the sound of a system, encountering its first real friction. 2 weeks after the party, I got a call from my Uncle Thomas, my father's eldest brother, a man of few words and considerable practical sense. He did not open with pleasantries. "Chloe," he said, "your father told me what happened at the party. The seating. That was not right what he did." A pause. "He knows it too now. Your Aunt Carol had a word with him after you left. And then Grandma had a word with him. And then the photograph. Your mother cried when she opened it, by the way. In the middle of the party. Your cousin Victor was sitting right there when it happened, which was a moment. Victor, I would later learn, had made a small comment, something dismissive, when my parents were opening the gifts. Something like, 'It's just a photo.' Grandma had looked at him across the table with an expression that, according to 3 separate family members who later described it to me, required no words. She had picked up the framed photograph and held it so the whole table could see it. And she had said, slowly, clearly, for everyone present, 'This is from Chloe. She spent months making this. She found our only wedding photograph. She gave it back to us. This is what love looks like when it is quiet.' Tor had apparently looked at his plate for the remainder of the dinner. My father, I was told, had gone quiet at that moment too. The settled smile gone. Something else in its place, but quiet realizations and family. Dinner moments were not the point. The point was what happened when I was no longer there. In week 2, the property tax reminder came, and no one was sure of the procedure to pay it online. My mother spent an afternoon at the county office and came back with the wrong form. In week 3, the internet service had an outage, and my father spent 2 hours on hold because I'd always been the one to navigate the service center calls. In week 3 also, a notice arrived regarding a discrepancy in their filing from 2 years ago, a small thing, easily resolved. But requiring specific documents, I had been the one to organize and store. My father called a CPA he half knew for help and paid $400 for a correction I would have handled in a single afternoon. None of this was revenge in any theatrical sense. I had not planned any of it. I had simply stopped doing the things I had always done without acknowledgement, and the natural weight of those things, and the actual mass of invisible labor had become visible. 13 years of weight revealed in 3 weeks. My father called on a Thursday evening 3 weeks and 2 days after the party. He asked if we could meet. Not for a meal. Not with the family, just the 2 of us. Said yes. We met at a small coffee shop near his office, the kind of place he would never have chosen on his own. Too quiet, too few TVs. He had arrived before me and was sitting with a glass of water. He hadn't touched. He did not start with an apology. He started with a question. "When did you start doing all of this?" He said. "All the coordinating. The management. When did this start?" I told him. I walked him through it slowly, not to wound him, but because the question deserved an honest answer. The overdue bills I had started catching at 19. The family calendar I had started maintaining at 21. The 3 years I had handled, grandma's medical appointments and home maintenance, because no one else had noticed they needed handling. The $135 I had paid quietly, to clear the back dues on their property account in 2019, because the notice had come during a period when I knew the family finances were stretched and I had not wanted them to worry. That last one stopped him. "You paid?" He paused. "I didn't know that." "I know you didn't," I said. "I didn't tell anyone." He was quiet for a while. Not uncomfortable quiet, thinking quiet. Finally he said, "Why didn't you ever say anything? Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him for a moment before answering. "Because I didn't think it would change anything," I said. "And I didn't want to be the kind of person who tallies what they've given to their family. I wanted to help. That part was real. But I think somewhere along the way, I stopped being a daughter who helped and became an employee who was never paid and never thanked, and was somehow still expected to be grateful for the position." He didn't push back on that. He sat with it. I watched his face process something. Not guilt exactly. Something older and quieter. Recognition, maybe. "The garage," he said finally. "I didn't think I know," I said. "That's the part that hurt most. Not the insult. The fact that you didn't think." He nodded slowly. We talked for almost 2 hours. I am not going to tell you it ended with tears, and a transformed relationship, and a father who suddenly understood everything he had missed. Real life is not structured that way. But I will tell you that he listened, actually listened, in the way that people listen when they have finally run out of alternative explanations. And that at the end of the evening, when we stood outside the coffee shop, he said something I did not expect. "I'm sorry, Chloe. I don't think I understood what you were carrying. I don't think I wanted to look closely enough to understand." It was not a complete sentence. It was not a resolution. But it was the first true thing he had said to me in longer than I could remember. And I received it as such. I want to tell you what I did next, because this is not only a story about leaving. It is also a story about what happens when you decide to come back on different terms. Did not disappear from my family. I am still their daughter. I still love them in the complicated, embedded way that blood and shared history make inevitable. But I renegotiated the invisible contract. Started saying no to things that had previously been assumed. Not every time. I still help when help is needed and asked for. But asked for became the operative phrase. No more preemptive solving, no more quietly absorbing costs that should have been shared. No more organizing events in which I would be seated in the garage. Had one further conversation with my mother, about 2 months after the party. She had been circling it. I think she is not a woman who moves quickly toward difficult subjects. She sat across from me in my apartment and, after 20 minutes of talking about other things, said, "That night, I should have said something to your father about the seating. I noticed it and I didn't say anything. I said, I know. Mom, that's also something I needed you to understand. She didn't have an easy answer for that, but she acknowledged it. That was new. As for Grandma, Grandma needed no conversation. She had understood the terms of my situation longer than anyone. I think, and the photograph had been the only message she needed. She called me on my birthday, 2 months after the party, and said simply, "Keep the gift for someone who puts you at the right table." Sweetheart, I told her I intended to, and Victor, since some of you are wondering, the $500 has still not been repaid to Grandma's account, but that story is no longer mine to manage. Here is what I know now, on the other side of all of it. Being needed is not the same as being valued. I was needed for 13 years in ways that would have cost a great deal of money, to replace with actual hired professionals. I was valued in the way that people value a utility, noticed when absent, taken for granted when present. The most powerful thing I did was not walk out of that party. The most powerful thing I did was stop performing the role that had made me invisible and wait calmly for the people who loved me to look up and see what had actually been there. And to anyone listening who recognizes this story as your own, not the details, but the feeling you want to say this, you are allowed to sit down. A seat you have to earn every day through invisible labor was never really yours. The table you set for everyone else, you are allowed to eat at it too. I'm Chloe, and I finally set the table on my own terms. If this story moved you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you soon.